I think I was up to so much mischief with maybe two aunts when I was very, very young who were teachers. And one a principal of a school in Detroit, and the other an English teacher in middle school, which is the ultimate challenge in education, I feel. So my life has been, I think, education. And I'm thinking too maybe the time when I first began reading and using its influence to kind of give me some idea of what was going on in my life and in the world. So the first biblical reading I really paid attention to came, I don't know, kind of early in junior high and this and mischief and mainly in high school. I can date these things back. I was kicked out of one of the high schools, and because it was a religious school, that may have had much to do with it. I've always wondered how Ecclesiastes and the one that followed, the Song of Solomon, what they had to, why they were in the Bible in the first place. But it was a lot of fun to read, and among the old kings and all of that stuff, here was life. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. An irony, for when I first read this, I thought vanity was makeup and all of that sort of thing, which may have drawn my attention to this book, but mostly it just seemed, what does that have to do with anything? It's so superfluous. But then I found it's a translation in, well, what was that, in the 17th century of a word that really means meaninglessness, of there's just nothing to it. So that was his view of life. For Ecclesiastes, searched and searched and searched, and all he found in all of his experiences was, well, what can you do about it? And the answer is not much. But well, the Pete Seeger song that I'm looking at now, for everything there is a season, a time, to every purpose under heaven, and so on. And I just kept reading and reading, and it seems every paragraph has something to say. So there is nothing, this is the way I paraphrase it, for a person but that she eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of the field wherein she labors, for this is the gift of God, or something like that. And so that's what influenced me. Of course, there's the idea of injustice. I'd been expelled from a school I enjoyed at the time, but luckily I got into a better one. And I did learn enough to eventually get me through college. I don't think from getting kicked out of school, although it gave me something to go on when I was kicked out of college. But I don't know, in high school, the thing that became most meaningful to me was Mr. Roberts, for I was a mischievous person, and what does it get me? And going back to Ecclesiastes and Mr. Roberts, not much. But I learned about character and the character I wanted to be. He had been a medical student on the outside, Mr. Roberts, Thomas Hagen was talking about. He loathed the captain and all the circumstances of his present station were an agony to him. The crew worshipped him. They really did. Devotion of a sort can be bought or commanded or bullied or begged. But it was accorded Mr. Roberts unanimously and voluntarily. He was a sort of leader who is followed blindly because he does not look back to see if he is being followed. And that carried me through. I admired Mr. Roberts. I particularly remember being in, it had to be when I was at St. Joe, I never had any interest in a car until that time. The night I was kicked out of school, my father let me have the car the first time, I think. Anyway, Mr. Roberts, I don't recall it being that night, but I would drive the car, and I would just drive down to the beach, which was only a few blocks. But I'd sit in the car, and I remembered a scene from Mr. Roberts where here he was stuck in the middle of nowhere doing nothing and finding it loathing, distasteful, everything about it. Except in a way he was a professional. He was Mr. Roberts. He guided himself. But he saw a fleet of boats going off to war, and he realized how hollow he was, being stuck in this bucket in this nowhere. And I think he told somebody about it and eventually got off to war, and Mr. Roberts died. Ecclesiastes, with that idea, Mr. Roberts was that type of person who was a leader simply because he never looked around to see if he was being followed. That was the path I had to take. But I had to take two paths. So the first element in the learning process that really, I guess, entered and became a part of me for the experience of being transgendered and hidden about it and living in a life that, well, I can't say I loathed, I realized it was essentially meaningless. And I still do. But I did meaningful things along the way, I think.